Jo here. Before we start this episode, I just want to give you a heads up that about 5 minutes before the end, my mic stopped working. I'm still picked up on Lex's, but just so you know what's going on. Technical problems, we'll get it sorted for next time. Enjoy!
You're listening to Rethinking the Mundane with Jo and Lex,
where an industrial designer and a creative technologist talk about everyday objects, systems, question its purpose, tries to repurpose them, or imagine a new future, or we just leave it alone.
And today we're going to talk about something that is always watching us, always there, especially in London, but we don't often notice it, and that is CCTV. Now, you know a lot about CCTV, Lex.
Well, I guess we can start off originally. CCTV, I guess in this context where we talk about this in this episode, is obviously going to focus a lot on the surveillance side of stuff. CCTV stands for closed circuit television. And it's interesting because as I read here, almost all video cameras in some way fit this definition, but the term is mostly often applied to those used in surveillance. Quick historical facts. The first sort of CCTV system was first conceived or developed in the 1927 by a bunch of researchers at the Soviet Union. But where it really grew into like proper application was in the 60s. And so early CCTV systems were installed in central London by the Met Police. And then over the years, until the 80s, it became more widespread. And, we talk in this conversation today, we talk in the context of London, where London is one of the most surveilled cities in the world. I wish I actually had the fact on how much CCTV cameras there is in London.
I'll have a look. Carry on talking.
It opens up the door to an interesting conversation. Initially, when CCTVs were introduced, there was no way to store or record information, so you had to constantly monitor it all the time. Over the years now, as storage is easier, we can store these things, we can record these things with ease, and now we're getting to the next step. Now we're integrating machine learning models into cameras and get into this world of facial recognition, where now one can walk in the street and a camera can scan your face, scan your body, scan your gait, scan you name it, and open up information about yourself. And now we get to this place of surveillance culture, where we go in, and this is an area that at my time at community we were interested in when the Mozilla Foundation asked us to create a speculative provocation for March 1st, 2019, and we created this cap called the invisible mask. You wore the cap, it emits infrared light to the human face. Infrared light is invisible, but the whole idea was just more for this whole concept of how do you disrupt facial recognition cameras where they use infrared to scan the human face as well, and this was based on an academic theory about disrupting facial recognition cameras with infrared light. So we are growing in this place where it's still a very niche world, this conversation about perhaps surveillance culture, and it hasn't really been something that's maybe grown into the mainstream, should I say. But yeah, it's a whole, it's a space that that always challenges me when it comes to this world of CCTV and stuff, in regards to it's so context dependent, because I don't know how much cameras are there
in London. So in 2022, the data says that there was about 940,000. So we could probably imagine now you're getting close to 1 million cameras in London.
So there's 1 million cameras in London, for example. I don't know, does that make you feel safer in London that there is 1 million cameras?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because I think as a white woman of below average height and body size, it probably does make me feel safer knowing that if perhaps if I'm in an area where there is cameras, then crime may be less likely to happen, and it's I guess it probably does make me feel safer. But I'm also aware that it's I don't know. What about you? I mean, I don't think that you're quite as likely to get jumped or attacked on a street, but
yeah, it's an interesting one for me. I think do I feel safer? I can't deny that maybe if I was in a situation, I would be like, oh, is there any cameras? That would probably be one of the first things you would do. Oh, was there any cameras? Now we don't even need CCTV cameras because most people will film you going through stuff, upload it on the internet. So, and that type of stuff. So perhaps I can say, and this is what I said, that it's one of those things that challenges me as, somebody who works with these, face recognition models or these image recognition, object recognition models, would I say. It challenges me and it's always challenged me since I've taught about this. And because it's like, yes, I will feel safe, but it's also a double-edged sword because I also know that that the cameras will also police me. It's funny when we do these shows because we're almost like the polar opposite, innit? I'm black, I'm 6'4", I'm built like hell. Nobody wants to sit next to me on the train most times, which is nice. I got bare free space. But I understand in the world that I'm subject to particular stereotypes, and I'm subject to particular things. And I know that from walking into the grocery store and the security guards, some security guards may want to follow you, some security guards, And so I know that once you put a model out there in the world and you put this on a camera, it's left to its own, logical reasoning. Yeah. What does that do for me? Would I be a target? I wouldn't even know if I'm a target, right? So I think it's just those sort of conversations that get into those like ethical, societal implications of safety versus surveillance, and how do we adapt for that? Is there a better way? That it's such an interesting thing. Is there a better way? Is there a obviously it requires us, if the human condition is so complex, right? This is something that's been created based on the human condition and the complexity of the human condition, but also based on the complexity of societal systems in a way where, why does crime happen? There's particular reasons why that happens. And, but it's like, it's so complex when we talk about safety, design for safety. And I remember just before the call, you showed me some recent designs for home cameras, and they look like things to play with in the park, but they were weird. It was like the camera most times is designed to be hidden on a top corner somewhere, but this one looks like it's just there in the park, and it's like, hey friend, look at me.
Lex is talking about some designs for home CCTV that were done by a Danish design agency called Swift, and they're you can look them up. They're quite playful. Imagine someone's taken a kind of pole and added a sort of twisted it in a funny shape and painted it bright orange and stuck a camera on the top of it, and it definitely draws attention to that camera. And there's an argument to say, well, if I'm going to be watched, I'd like to know I'm being watched. But then on the other hand, by drawing attention to it, and that realizing you're being watched is sort of a bit that's kind of weird. And I think that when it comes to the idea of someone surveilling you, it's kind of layers, right? If it's passively recording and it's there almost as a deterrent for crime, and if something was to happen as a way of supporting kind of prosecution or identifying the actual kind of perpetrator of a crime, then for me it feels okay. But as soon as you start adding in the kind of learning layer, the AI layer, the facial recognition layer, that you can start to, it's really easy to imagine starting to sort of apply rules as you say, models to that have biases, naturally have biases. It's like, okay, well, if it's surveilling a shopping centre and you've taught it that a 6'4" black man walking into the shopping centre is someone to be watched, then suddenly these cameras are deliberately sort of following one individual.
Yeah.
And that starts to add sort of a layer of bias, towards different people in society that feel unfair because it's almost like kind of expecting something to happen, pulling out certain people, and then you got the layer of that where you're starting to use facial recognition to start to track people, and obviously that's where it's gone. That's where it's headed to now in places like China, where they can kind of conduct facial recognition on 60 to 100 people at any one time, with just one camera. So
that's crazy.
The amount of data that is being kind of consumed and like created, and that then is fed into the central system, basically would allow someone from the kind of government to know where someone was almost all hours of the day, because there's so many cameras, like every traffic light, every lamppost, there's probably going to be a camera on it, so it can follow you down the street into a place of work, and then back down, out in the evening and back towards your home, so it can kind of really know where every single human being is. And then it's like, well, you could definitely start to just ask, like, well, why would someone want that level of knowledge about each individual human being? And there's only one answer to that, and that has to be control.
But this is the thing. This is why it's such an interesting. Yeah, it is from a governmental perspective, or it is a control mechanism. We were even talking about it, especially where now, for example, there are particular laws that have been debated in the UK about protest, or not right to protest, or and all of those things, and it's like increasingly the UK's government is displaying particular traits of that desire for surveillance culture, in a way that and I guess the question for me has always been, from when we first explored this work with Invisible Mask, and I remember Kill always having this thing of like, how do we opt out? How can we opt out from a surveillance world? What does it mean to opt out?
I mean, if you can opt out of cookies online, but you can't, as you say, you can't do that
in the physical
space. You can avoid certain areas, but the thing is we don't even know where CCTV cameras are.
Yeah.
And so, do you need an app like Waze that shows you all the speed cameras to then be like, here's where all the cameras are? But the idea of even creating an app that shows you where they are would be only reason, someone would immediately just assume that had been created particularly for people who want to do wrong, to then avoid being caught.
Yeah.
And so you kind of like, you've got no way of explaining why you would even want to create that kind of information, and give that information to people.
And then I guess as a designer, how it's an interesting one, right? Because it's almost similar to like the traffic light, where the traffic light is a thing that's been implemented in space and by law. Well, I guess the traffic light, by law, you have to follow it. Where with CCTV, I don't exactly know what, like the legal grounds are like, but I don't know, is how, similar to talking about that, the facial recognition, not facial recognition, sorry, the CCTV cameras designed by Swift. Do you think their goal is to perhaps try to encourage us to build a better relationship with these cameras? Is that the future? With things be like that? And I think when we talk about this, about the work that's been done there, it's not as a critique of their work. It's just more of a observation of their work. And I guess my question to you is: would we have more? Like we talked about it, there's over 900k, up to 10 million cameras in London, and where are they?
Yeah, but if you look at, say, a speed camera on the road, they have to be painted yellow. They have to be visible, have to be obvious.
Yeah.
And and yet, like you say, a CCTV camera is kind of deliberately hidden, and you've got all of these people now installing smart doorbells with cameras, so that's, you can walk down the street and be being captured on footage potentially from a doorbell, that's there, and obviously it's only supposed to potentially come on at certain times, but you can get ones that can kind of passive record, and it's fundamentally, it just seems harmless and meaningless, and it doesn't really matter because, oh well, I think we've still got, at least I still got like an image in my head of someone having to sort of go in and see whether, just, I don't know, some old school detective film where they're going into and a shop and asking if they've got the footage of the CCTV, and they're like digging through a load of videotapes. No one's ever actually looking at these things. And obviously, if no one's ever looking at these things and it gets recorded over in kind of 7 days, then it sort of is harmless. But as you say, as soon as you integrate a level of intelligence into that, kind of put an AI element into that, then, or machine learning element into it, then it starts to become much more than that, because it is being watched.
Yeah.
And information is being taken from that.
Yeah. But I guess it goes back to that thing of safety, right? Individualism. I don't even know if that's a word.
That's a word.
Okay. Because it's like, I guess, it goes back to that safety argument. Right, we have the Nests, we have I don't even know which other ones we have over the Nest, all the different stuff, smart, the camera devices on our door and stuff. But I guess it goes back to that safety aspect of, individual safety, and we don't maybe have enough community systems in place which don't require these technologies that allow for the policing, for effective community policing of crime, trouble, mostly crime. A lot of these cameras are put there for crime or to, who rang my doorbell? Okay, I can answer the door for you. But they're mostly linked to the safety thing, and an individualistic society where, we are basically reducing the human interaction side and depending on technology. Are we going wrong? Does this continue to make us even more individualistic? What do you think a possible future might be? And what is the future that you may want to have?
I think it's interesting talking about it from that kind of individualism kind of perspective, because it reminds me, it brought to mind Neighborhood Watch. And you know how Neighborhood Watch used to be a thing, and it was like, I'm a member of Neighborhood Watch, you have a sticker on, and that was the original sort of, not original, but like growing up, that was what I was taught, was like a deterrent for crime, because there could have been people that would be actively surveilling to some extent, like the neighborhood, and checking if they saw someone that looked a bit dodgy, or wasn't from around there or something, and would go up and ask them like, hey, can I help you, what are you doing? That would be enough to kind of perhaps deter someone who was scoping out an area to say, okay, actually there's kind of a lot of people watching this space. But I don't, maybe it's because I live in London now, and I don't think anyone gives a crap about anybody else very much. I'm unlikely to question someone who walks in behind me in my block, because I live in a block with lots of people, and I'm not exactly going to turn around and be like, so what flat are you going to go? Why are you here? Or if someone was knocking on my neighbour's door, like going up, peek through the spy hole, and which I sometimes do, but like I wouldn't get out the door and ask them if I can help them. So that idea of like looking out for your own community, at least in bigger cities, and cities are by their nature like growing, is kind of lost, and so we are more reliant on technology to fill those gaps, because we're just sort of not looking out for each other. And people, as you say, are like, well, I'm going to look after my own safety, and I'm going to put CCTV in, and then the next neighbours are, and then everyone is, and suddenly you have the ability to watch the entire street. So it's an interesting one, and I don't really know where it's going to go from here in necessarily like a super positive direction, because it's only going to get more sophisticated as a technology, and there are only going to be more cameras. So we're in a situation where the ability, our kind of sense of privacy, if we think about it too hard, sort of feels as if it's being encroached. But I guess, by their deliberate nature of being sort of hidden.
Yeah.
They're sort of out of sight, out of mind, and we don't really go. We kind of just go about our day.
Okay. Yeah. I think you answered it well. You actually answered it well. You answered, and like I said, it's such a complex conversation. I think there's so much different arguments for, arguments against that, you know, create, like I said, this almost sometimes contradictory, but also, response. I think there's obviously, I think we do need to, I hope you come back to community in some way. Even if these technologies exist, there is still this community component to existing, which I think is definitely highly important. I think in society, and like you said, there might probably only going to be more cameras, and they're just going to get more sophisticated and complex, and God knows what happens.
Yeah, but
then
we all have to take a bit of responsibility to look out for each other, and maybe then we don't need to rely on cameras quite so much. But anyway, I mean, we'll keep this one short and sweet because there's so much to unpack, but also it's a nice place to leave it. So if you've got thoughts yourself and you'd like to let us know what they are, please do get in touch. Like, follow, subscribe, all of those things. And we'll be back next week with more Rethinking the Mundane.